To every one of you with us today, I'm glad you've joined us for our presentation on the Reserve Study Financial Analysis. We're here to leave you knowing how to tell if you should feel good or bad, or somewhere in between, about your reserve fund size and how that starting point influences your reserve funding and why similar associations may have very different reserve funding recommendations. This is the outline we'll be using today, starting with an overview, and then Brian, as our guest expert, will walk you through understanding your reserve fund strength and basic funding plan issues. Now, it all starts with appreciating that we are all on a journey to the future. It's going to be full of twists and turns and bumps and obstacles, but we have a pretty good understanding of the journey ahead. So to the best of our ability, it's in our best interest to create a plan to get to the future successfully. Every association has a set of expenses in the future. They often look something like this, a fingerprint of some years expensive and some years with not very much, but they're all predictable. The roof will fail, the paint will dry and chip and peel, the asphalt will crack and get potholes, the elevators will start to break down more frequently. We know these things, and we can predict pretty closely how much they'll cost and when they'll occur. These are the twists and turns, and in a driving analogy, the distance between gas stations that we know are in the future for each of our associations. And we cover identifying all these expenses, the components appearing in your reserve study, in our Reserve Studies 101 webinar. We presented that last month, and it's now available on our website and on YouTube if you want to catch up and watch that program. Now, to lead your association forward, you've likely been asking yourself three questions, starting out with, how are we doing? Are we well prepared financially? Then what do we need to do to prepare for this trip to make sure we don't run out of money for the journey? And then third, how come we hear so many different answers to what we need to do to prepare financially? Well, by the end of today's program, you'll have answers to these three questions. And this is an important discussion. It was important even before the tragic collapse of Champlain Towers South last year, where gradually over 40 years, the association fell significantly behind on its repair and replacement projects. Now, for every association, you need to understand that deterioration is ongoing and inevitable. It never takes a day off. It's therefore a formidable and expensive opponent. If your association is not actively fighting this ongoing battle, ignoring the reality and the costs of the battle damage you're taking on every day, week, month, and year, every weather season, you are losing. But no worries, today we're going to arm you with the tools you need to have success. Now, our starting point assumes that you have a reserve component list with components well and wisely selected according to National Reserve Study standards. And that's because all your financial decisions rely on knowing the expenses that are ahead, the twists and turns and obstacles ahead of you in your journey to the future. So, Brian, let me turn the microphone over to you so you can begin helping our audience, board members, managers, homeowners, all understand how they can learn the current strength of their reserve fund.
Thank you, Robert. I do appreciate the introduction, and thank you all for being here today. It is such a pleasure to be able to speak with you all today, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to learn about something as important as your reserves. So it's just such an honor to be here and to be educating you all. So thank you so much. Leading your association forward into the future is quite a big responsibility. So take a look at this photo. At this association, there is roofing, painting, a central courtyard, a pool, a nice trellis, balconies, and that's just what you see in this picture. If you're a board member, manager, or a homeowner at this association, will the journey forward be smooth or will it be bumpy? And by that, I mean full of special assessments, some deferred maintenance, and potentially large assessment increases. So let's start off your journey to the future by helping you understand your starting point, how you and even outside parties like a real estate agent can get comfortable that there's a definite answer to the question about your association's reserve fund strength. As Robert suggested a moment ago, it all starts with your reserve component list. So here's a simplified component list showing a description of the project, its useful life cycle, and the number of years remaining before it needs to be repaired or replaced, as well as its current cost. And so this would be a pretty solid list at your association. and assembled based on the National Reserve Study Standards 4-part test shown here. If you're not familiar with this concept, I'd recommend you catch up and watch our Reserves Studies 101 webinar. And I'll make sure that there's a link to that program in our outline. So, how much cash in reserves at your association would make you feel good? Again, National Reserve Study Standards step in with a solution to that question. And the solution gives us all a reliable measuring system that works for all types of associations. So it's not a dollar per unit or a percent of unit value or even just a straight cash number. It's actually a calculation that compares your current reserve fund to your association's needs, telling you how good your reserves fit the needs of the association. So let me start off with a few simple examples. Here's the first component from that sample component list I showed a moment ago: pool furniture replacement. It has a 5-year useful life, a remaining useful life of 0, meaning it's time to be replaced, and its current cost estimate of $4,600. If you were a board member needing to buy a new set of pool furniture, how much would you like to see in your reserves ready to be spent on that pool furniture? So think for a moment. What do you think? You probably guessed $4,600. So when the remaining life is 0, you need the money now. And then that's how much money you should have in your reserves. So let's do this again. Suppose you have a pool that needs to be resurfaced every 10 years, and it currently has a remaining useful life of 5. So it's halfway used up for its life. You don't need the $10,000 now because the expense is still 5 years away. With a current replacement cost estimate of $10,000, let me see if I can drop enough hints for you. Now that its life is halfway used up, how much cash do you think would be good for your association to have set aside at this time? If it's halfway used up, again, you probably guessed correctly. With half of its life used up, you ideally should have half of the funds set aside. So $5,000 is a good amount for the association to have set aside now that that component is halfway used up. Okay, so for those of you who learn more through pictures, let me walk you through this exact example a different way. Ignoring interest and inflation in this scenario, at 5 years old, you would like to have half of the amount set aside, right, of that $10,000. So then in year 6, you would like to have $6,000 set aside. In year 7, $7,000, $8,000, then year 9, $9,000, and then finally, $10,000. The year that you actually need to do the resurfacing. And that's the only year that you need that full $10,000 ready to spend on the pool resurfacing. So what's important to understand then is that in the 11th year, after you've spent the money, you don't need $10,000, right? You only need 1/10 of the total value. So you need $1,000 in reserves as you start the cycle over again. So this shows that your reserve needs go up and down over the years, depending on the timing of your reserve projects. Your needs are not the total cost of your reserve components, and your reserve needs will go up and down. And due to inflation, your reserve needs will generally have to trend upwards. But you get the point that the reserve needs of your association actually go up and down over the years. It's just not a static number. Doing what we've talked about is it's a pretty simple calculation done by your reserve study provider in your reserve study. Just the fractional age of every component multiplied by the current cost. The total of all those individual calculations is called the fully funded balance. Now, let me show you what that looks like. So we've added another column here to the component list table at the right. That is the fully funded balance column. That's the calculation of the current reserve needs of the association. The highlighted row shows what we did for the pool furniture. Since it's fully deteriorated, you need the full amount in reserves right now. The same is true for pool resurface. When a $10,000 project is halfway deteriorated, the fully funded balance is $5,000. It's all fairly simple. Now, when you add them all together, you get the fully funded balance total for the property. This year, the fully funded balance is about $154,000. That's the amount of deterioration at the association this year, and that's the ideal amount to have in reserves. If you've had that much in reserves, you should feel pretty good.
Well, Brian, that's a nice way of talking about the target, but we still haven't talked about money in reserve. So that's the next topic you're going to begin to touch?
Correct. That is right. So the first step is having a target, right? Now, the second step is comparing your reserve fund to that target and learning what the comparison tells you about your association. As you can see in the graphic here, it's all about balance. How does your cash compare to the needs of your association? That's going to be what tells you if your reserves are strong, fair, or weak. That's another calculation that's done in your reserve study. And that comparison between your current cash and reserves and your current fully funded balance, that is what we call your percent funded. So using the component list with a fully funded balance of $154,000, now if you have $308,000 in your reserve account, you've learned that your reserve fund now is twice as big as the current amount of deterioration, meaning 200% funded. On the other hand, if at this time you only have $77,000 in reserves, you know now that you're only 50% funded. You now have a point of comparison to learn if your reserve fund is bigger than or smaller than your reserve fund needs. But still, what does that mean to you? So now we're getting to the answer of how you can learn if your reserves are strong, fair, or weak. It's called the percent funded, which is a strong indicator of special assessment risk. And that's what you want to know. And that's what the percent funded tells you. It's a powerful risk indicator. Just like your own health, you care about your cholesterol numbers and your blood pressure numbers, right? So when your percent funded is low, on the left side of the chart, you can see there in red, in the 0 to 30% range, you're going to have about a 50% chance of needing a special assessment to pay for your predictable and scheduled reserve projects. However, on the right-hand side, in the green range, are for associations at or above 70% funded. You're going to see that special assessments are rare. That means associations above 70% funded regularly have enough reserves to do their projects on time. Those boards will feel comfortable that the reserves are strong. So the question is, where is your association? Again, percent funded should be a number calculated in your reserve study, like a grade in school. It is nice to have a score near 100%, but unlike school, a score of 75% is still pretty good. And unlike school, there are plenty of associations with a percent funded that is actually above 100%. So your homework then is to check your latest reserve study and see what range you're in. Are you in the 0 to 30 weak range, or the 30 to 70 fair range, or the 70 and above strong range?
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for taking a complicated subject and breaking it down and making it very simple. I think everyone now knows how to evaluate the reserve fund size. It's not about cash. It's not about a percentage of unit values or total budget. It's about fit. And you described that real clearly, the amount of cash the association has compared to their needs. And that's important not only to the board and the owners, but knowing reserve fund strength also helps a manager understand kind of the pressures that client association is going to be feeling, what kind of stress they're in as they approach big projects. And it helps real estate agents know if the association is well prepared for its own future, or if a new owner is likely going to be facing a special assessment. Okay, so Brian, let's turn the corner. What are the basics of reserve funding, and how does your starting reserve fund strength, how is that going to affect your reserve funding needs?
Thank you, Robert. Yeah, so back to the big picture. Remember that deterioration is happening and it's expensive. There's nothing you can do to stop it or avoid it. So one way or another, you're going to have to pay for that. And that generally takes 4 forms: budgeted contributions, catch-up special assessments, loans, or the net loss to your pocketbook from declining property values. What I'll focus on for the next few minutes is the least expensive way, and that's the fairest way to offset reserve deterioration, and that is called your budgeted reserve contribution. Real simple, just another line item in your ongoing budget. So just remember that while your reserve study provider did the calculations to find the percent funded, we'll do some other calculations to figure out the path forward to the future. But they are different calculations. The calculations done to measure your reserve fund balance are different from the calculations to prepare your association for the future. Reserve fund strength is a current calculation. Therefore, it uses current costs. Funding plan calculations deal with costs in the future. So funding plan calculations typically will incorporate interest and inflation. So reserve fund strength reveals where your association is now, and reserve funding affects the kind of future you'll have at the association. but I want to suggest that they are related. And I want to pose an important question. What is the purpose of this year's reserve funding? Is it for the here and now or for the future? Give it a moment of thought, and what do you think? It's important to understand that the reserve funding you're doing now offsets current and ongoing deterioration. Expenses are indeed in the future, but deterioration is an ongoing daily occurrence. Reserve funding this year offsets this year's deterioration. And if this year's contribution offset this year's deterioration, and next year's contributions offset next year's deterioration, then the future will take care of itself. Done this way, all owners end up paying their fair share of the ongoing deterioration through budgeted contributions for as long as they are in the association. So there are no special assessments to fear. Everybody will be paying their own way. This is important to communicate to your owners. They are not setting funds aside for other owners in the future. Rather, this year reserve funding pays for this year's reserve deterioration. It's as simple as seeing your reserve funding as paying, for example, the roof deterioration bill or the asphalt deterioration bill. You're going to have a lot more success as a manager or board member, and you're going to have more peace as a homeowner being asked to pay for reserve funding when you understand reserves in this way. Now, I'm going to talk about swimming for a moment. You've probably seen a race on television where the world record pace is shown, and you can see swimmers trying to keep up. That's just like reserves at your association. Your assets are all deteriorating at a predictable pace. The question is if you are keeping up or if you're falling behind. And just a heads up, your percent funded tells you if you're starting out at the pace line, if you're in good shape, or if you're starting kind of from the back trying to catch up. And so here's how it works. The chart here shows the same components that we've seen before, but instead of calculating the fully funded balance, let me show you a little trick. We're going to calculate the deterioration rate, or another way, the cost of deterioration per year. If you divide the cost by the useful life, you get the annual cost of deterioration per year. So it's easy to see here in the second line. Pool resurface, it's $10,000 every 10 years, means it's deteriorating at a rate of $1,000 per year. Another easy one is the fourth line, asphalt. It's a $5,000 expense every 5 years. So it is deteriorating at a rate of $1,000 per year. Do that calculation for every single component and then sum the total, and you get $20,170 per year. Your reserve contributions are going to need to be pretty close to this value. So that approximate $20,000 is the association's pace line. So when I showed you the slide of the swimmers in the pool, this is what I mean by keeping pace of ongoing deterioration that your association needs to keep up with. And so I'm going to use this graph to begin to show you how your reserve fund strength is related to your reserve funding rate. And I'm going to plot your reserve fund strength over time. So time's moving from left to right. And as I'd indicated earlier, a strong reserve fund is over 70% funded and is in green, while a weak or severely underfunded reserve fund is in the 0 to 30% funded range at the bottom, shown in red. The 100% funding level is highlighted with an arrow. All right, so let's go find out what different reserve contribution rates do for this association. So let's take a typical association starting out at about 50% funded. Ignoring interest and inflation, to keep this example simple for me, let's presume that they are funding their reserves at exactly that number, that $20,170 per year. They're matching that deterioration rate that we just calculated. Funding their reserves at that rate is going to keep up with deterioration. It is not going to cause their reserve fund to gain or drop in net strength, just some bouncing around as the fully funded balance goes slightly up and down over the years. This association is just keeping pace with the deterioration that is going on at their association. Like in the swimming pool, not really catching up, but also not falling farther behind. So you can probably guess where I'm going, right? If an association wants or needs to strengthen their reserves, they're going to have to step on the gas and fund their reserves at a rate higher than that $20,170 per year. The net effect will be that their percent funded will trend upwards over the years, lowering their risk of special assessments. Associations with a weak reserve fund need to fund more than their pace rate to prepare financially for a significant expense to avoid a special assessment. It's just like how if you're behind in the swim race, you need to swim now harder to gain ground. And here's what happens if you fund your reserves at less than the rate of deterioration. Your reserve fund will drop in net strength over the years as your reserve fund falls farther and farther behind the amount of deterioration at your association. Associations that do this increase their risk of reserve-related problems. Many associations have been doing this unintentionally for years. Underfunding reserves, not paying your fair share, just means that you're kicking the can down the road and pushing that cost of deterioration onto the shoulders of future owners. And so here is what it boils down to. If you learn your reserves are weak and you need to be doing some catching up to prepare for an upcoming expense, you really need to step on the gas. And that's going to be expensive, raising your reserve funding requirements. But if your reserves are currently strong and you don't need to be pressing on the gas, well, your reserve fund requirements are going to be much lower, actually. So all you need to do is now just keep pace with the deterioration. And so people often make a mistake here, thinking that strong reserves will actually cost more money. For associations with a strong reserve fund, all they actually need to do is just continue moving forward smoothly. And it doesn't take as much money as it does to actually do the catch-up mode. So here's a little perspective. No matter what type of association you are, we find that reserve contributions typically need to be in the range of about 25% of the total budget to offset deterioration. Some associations need more, and while others need less. But for the purposes of this conversation, that's a good ballpark number. So if your reserve funding is significantly less than 25% of the total budget, there's a good chance that you're underfunding your reserves and your reserve fund strength is gradually dropping. Look at what your reserve study says to find out for sure. But you know what? Sometimes you don't even need to look at your reserve study to see what underfunding looks like. If your association is beginning to look like this, it is likely because you have not set aside enough reserves in the past and you don't have the cash it takes to take care of the property properly. And it's not just a deteriorated appearance. Deterioration affects home values. As you can see in this cartoon, where an agent is showing the association to some prospective buyers, they're not going to pay top dollar to become a member at this mess of an association. So do what you need to do. And if that means raising assessments, then do it. Your property values will rebound and return all that reserve funding and more.
Thanks, Brian. We did this program previously, and like before, I find myself just getting lost just listening because it's just great material. You've helped our audience now understand the importance of measuring their reserve starting strength and how that affects the reserve funding needs. I like the sports car compared to the economy car as far as understanding the pace and how hard you need to step on the gas or swim in the swimming pool. There is a lot more to funding plans, like which goal fits your association best. And that has to do more with how much tolerance you have for special assessment risk, how much you want to push it right up to the line, or how much margin you want for the very normal uncertainties in life. And just to give you the heads up, that difference in goals themselves can influence your reserve funding requirements about 10 to 15%. And then there's calculation methods. We didn't have time to address that today. They're called the component method and the cash flow method, also known as straight line and pooled. And these choices can influence your reserve funding needs significantly. And we're talking by 2 or 3 times, meaning a difference up to 300% in the size of recommended reserve funding rates just by the calculation methodology that you use. But you're probably wondering, how can that be? How can there be that much difference in the income you need to throw into reserves when the expenses have not changed? We're talking about exactly the same expenses here. How can there be such a difference in reserve income? And that's a great question. And we'll be able to spend some time answering that question in our next webinar, Reserve Studies 103 in early May. And following that will be a guest expert talking about reserve fund investing, and then a webinar on case studies of our clients, allowing you to watch and see what other clients of ours have done, learning from their choices, and hopefully getting some ideas to apply at your association. So make sure you're on our email list to get the notice when we've set those dates, and just scroll down to the bottom of any page on our website for the email sign-up link. And in addition, we have a new resource available to help your association. It's a book called Understanding Reserves. It's designed to be an easy desktop reference to all things reserves. And you can download chapter 1 for free at our website to get an idea of how it reads, kind of information in it, and get an idea if it's the right thing for you. We also have a deep library of additional resources on our website and on YouTube, free articles and videos, again, to help you have success at your association. If you want a document that summarizes this webinar, in the outline today, we'll include a link to our ebook on reserve fund strength. Like everything else you've heard, it's a free download. And again, to make sure you have the information you need to lead your association well. And saying that, if you want our help with your association, you can go to our website, reservestudy.com, and select the Request a Proposal link up at the top right, and we'll be glad to give your association our personal attention. Now, Brian and I hope we've left you today feeling better prepared to make wise decisions for your association, hitting those aha moments, so you'll be able to plan for the very predictable expenses that are coming your way. And with our years of experience here at Association Reserves, we've been down this trail many times, whether through free webinars or our professional reserve study services. We guide thousands of associations each year, just like yours, down the path to an improved future. And it would be great to come alongside you.